Jane Healey Happy Hour, the podcast that explores new and exciting novels of all genres. I'm your host, best-selling historical fiction author Jane Healey, and in today's episode, we welcome author John Glynn to discuss his debut novel, The Lost Book of Lancelot, which Publishers Weekly called a fresh, fun take on a classic that will as readily appeal to longtime Camelot fans as those with only passing familiarity with this world. Again, welcome, John. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick bio and then we will jump into all my questions.
Awesome.
All right. John Glynn is the editorial director of Hanover Square Press, an imprint of HarperCollins. His nonfiction debut, Out East, Memoir of a Montauk Summer, was an Indie Next Pick, and Oprah the Magazine's Best LGBTQ Book of 2019, and a Cosmopolitan Best Book of 2019, among other accolades. His writing has appeared in People, Oprah Daily, The Millions, and The Daily Beast. He lives in New York City with his partner and his dog, Whitman. Again, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have to ask what kind of dog you have.
He's part Cavalier, part Golden Doodle. So he has 3 different breeds in him. He's the sweetest boy. He's such a good pup.
I have a teacup Golden Doodle, so I'm a big Doodle fan. I'm a big dog fan, so I had to ask that before we jump in.
Yeah. Oh, no, I love that.
Okay, so the Lost Book of Lancelot is your debut. It's described as a queer retelling of the legend of Sir Lancelot. Talk about this unique premise and how you came up with it.
So, let's go back. Let's go back in time a little.
Okay.
To like 2021. I had published my memoir in 2019, and then the pandemic hit, and I had no creative energy whatsoever. And it wasn't until 2021 that, I was starting to sort of feel ready to dive back into a project. And I had read The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which I love that book so much. That book's a retelling of the Iliad, and it sort of centers this gay love story between Achilles and Patroclus. And it was just really eye-opening to me that, like, wow, like that interpretation, you can pull that from the source material, that's sort of always been there. And it got me thinking, like, what other ancient queer stories have kind of always been traveling with us, just sort of lurking in plain sight. And that's when I learned about Lancelot and a fellow knight named Galehaut. And, a lot of scholarly work has been written, about them from an academic standpoint. If you go really far back we're talking like 13th century, to this version of Arthurian legend called the Vulgate cycle. It's originally written in Old French. You'll find this amazing queer-coded love story between Lancelot and this fellow knight. And so when I learned about this thread of that lore, it just sort of stuck with me, and that's kind of the basis of this entire retelling.
Fascinating. Yeah, so fascinating. And I have questions related to that and those characters. But let's start with your research, because Arthurian legend is like this enormous layered tradition. Like I read your research notes and I'm like, this is so much. Like, I mean, so talk about your research process for the book, and what were your primary sources? Was there anything that surprised you? Like, how did you kind of distill it down into a narrative arc?
Oh my gosh, Jane, it was wild. It was wild. Like, it was a wild ride. It's a good thing I didn't really know what I was getting myself into at the jump, because I was already really overwhelmed. I'm not an academic, right? I'm not a scholar. I'm not like a medievalist. So all of this was essentially new to me. And I really, I had sort of a passing familiarity and appreciation of Arthurian legend, but I really started with the Vulgate cycle, the 13th century source, and it's like 1,000 pages long. It's 10 volumes, and there's one English translation of it. Everything I read is in translation, because I'm not like versed these like ancient languages. I don't want people to think that I was coming at this from like a source of expertise. It really was, it started with just a love of this one thread that inspired this entire, like basically like a crash course in
Yeah,
Arthurian legend. So
completely.
yeah, so I started with the Vulgate cycle, and then um I read some Sir Thomas Mallory, which is probably the version that if people have read any Arthurian legend, you usually, that's like the one you read in high school, Morte
Hmm.
Arthur. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is another that like a lot of people probably were assigned to read at some point in life. But then I sort of I looked at the an Italian version called Tavola Rotonda. I looked at this version by Ulrich and Chrétien, who sort of created Lancelot, the character as we know him. But it was interesting because, there are certain elements of Lancelot's story that are pretty consistent. He's almost always an orphan. He's almost always raised by this character, the Lady of the Lake.
Hmm.
And her name in my version is Viviana, which is, there is a version with that name. And but the lake that he is raised by is usually just sort of in a random forest somewhere in like France. But there's this one version where he's raised on an island, the Island of Maidens, it's called in the original source, and he's the only boy on this island of women, essentially. And I thought that was like so evocative, right? It
Oh
was
yeah.
really interesting. And so that became my focal point. That version became my focal point. But one of the nice things that I sort of learned as I dove in was that like these stories have been co-opted and like changed and altered for like so many different reasons by so many different writers over the years. There's not like one definitive source. So I kind of felt like I had license to play with some of these, play with some of these stories, make them fresh, pull in some of the sources from, from one source or another and kind of like remix them together in a way.
Yeah, and that's so interesting too, because we're not talking about like real history here, right? We're talking about legend and folklore, which gives you some freedom that in historical fiction you don't have. So that
Right.
was so interesting to me. And so talk about the Isle of Women, because I how did you build that world? Because I'm reading this and I'm like, first of all, what an amazing idea for an origin story, for him and like this island and these strong female characters around him. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like when we you were talking a little bit about like like for you, like as a historical fiction author, you're looking at time periods, and one of the tricky things about Arthurian legend is that a lot of the sources, are from the 1200s, 13,
Hmm.
1400s. But if King Arthur did exist, which like early records, there's a mention of an Arthur, he would have existed probably in the 5 or 600s.
Yeah.
So you have these sources that are writing about a legendary character, from the past, but they're writing it with no sense of history at all. So the writers in the 1200s are writing King Arthur as a contemporary character to them, right? They're
Interesting.
imbuing him with their contemporary values and aims, and they're not really creating a historical version of this character. So early on in creating the Isle of Women and creating the entire world, I kind of had to come to terms with the fact that like I'm not really going to be pegging this to a specific, even specific century, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
And like the medieval world is drastically different from the 500s to the 12 or 1300s, right? And I kind of had to just let that go
Hmm.
and create sort of a narrative world that felt like recognizably medieval and different and not I didn't want it to feel anachronistic, but I also wasn't too concerned with like pegging it to a specific time and place. But for the Isle of Women in particular, I mean, it was really, really fun to create that. So Lancelot he's raised by this surrogate mother in the Lady of the Lake, and there are seven women who live on this island, and all of them sort of are sort of the locus of power in this entire world, right? And that was something that I really wanted to play with, that I drew from the source material, and that women in Arthurian legend sort of fall into two camps, it seems. They are the beautiful damsel in distress, or they're like the outsider witch. Like there's
Yes,
very
that's true.
little, there's like very little in between. And they're often really one-dimensional in these original stories. And at the same time, they also do hold a lot of power,
Hmm.
even within like the patriarchal setup of the source material. So in this version, I really wanted to make it like this is a world in which like the women do have the power, and they actually are three-dimensional
Right.
characters.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so they're sort of the center and beating heart in a lot of ways of the book.
So interesting. Yeah, so another aspect, I guess I need to like brush up on my Arthurian legend. Like after reading this, I'm like, I feel like I need to like go back down that rabbit hole and take a course, or at least watch The Sword and the Stone, which I loved. Like I know
Love it.
you mentioned that in your author's note. So so I was not aware of the character. Is it pronounced Galehaut? Galehaut?
You know, you can pronounce it however you want, because I don't know how it's technically pronounced. In my mind, it's Galehoot, but
Galehoot. Okay.
I'm like nearly certain I'm wrong. I'm not sure.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
however you want to pronounce it is fine by me.
Sounds good. Okay, so Galehoot and Gawain, is it Gawain? Those are the two love interests. I had no idea, like when I was reading the book, like reading your author's notes, I'm like, oh, they're actually like there's an origin story for these characters as well, which is I had no idea. So talk about how you like brought these other two characters to the forefront of this novel.
Yeah, so it's fascinating. So in the original, so Galehoot is, you know, a lot of people have, maybe you've heard of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, like he's sort of a prominent figure. Maybe you've heard of Galahad, who is
Yes.
Lancelot's son, who
Mm-hmm.
also is like kind of just a name that people know. But like Galehoot is in the Vulgate cycle, he plays a really prominent role, but in later versions, his role gets kind of condensed, and to the point where he's sort of in the broader in the broader body of work of Arthurian legend. He's kind of just a footnote. He's a minor character overall, but you know, in the original, in the Vulgate cycle, Gale, who is he's in love with Lancelot. You know, he sees him across a battlefield, and he's about to lead an army to attack, and he stands everyone down and says, you know, give me a night with Lancelot and I will tell my army to stand down. And that to me was fascinating when I read that. It was like, what about, you know, what is it about that character? Like, there's so much depth there. And when Lancelot dies, he's actually buried. This is not a spoiler for my book. This is from the original.
Mm-hmm.
When he dies, he's buried next to Galehoot. And so the you know all of these sort of elements of the story were there,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of I build off of those.
Yeah, yeah, it's so well done and so interesting. So when I was researching for our talk, I read this sentiment, and I thought I thought it was so well said. Several early readers have picked up on how the novel interrogates prophecy, whether it's a guide or a cage, and who gets to write the story of a life. And was this a theme that like evolved as you were writing it, or was that something you were thinking about like from the start?
It very much just sort of emerged in the telling, to be
Yeah.
honest. You know, that's there. There's the prophecy that like Lancelot's going to be one of the greatest knights, but like a lot of the knights in Arthurian legend have that type of prophecy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And and for him in particular, it's sort of interesting. So Galehoot, Galehaut joins Lancelot in training on the Isle of Women in the early part of the book, and that's where they first connect and sort of begin to fall in love. Um, and at first, Lancelot has had like no social interaction, right? He's barely connected with anyone, any other boys or anyone his age. Really, he just lives on this secluded island with these women. And so when Lancelot comes on to the island, he's like so desperate for his approval. He just wants his camaraderie, but he's also very cautious of revealing that sense of desperation. But at the same time, Gale, who seems to be very confident and well versed in knighthood, knows of Lancelot's prophecy, and he's a little intimidated by that. So that's sort of where it started, was this idea of like, how would this prophecy sort of affect their dynamics relationally, but then how would it, knowing that like you have this sort of that your future is in some way foretold, how do you react to that? Do you push back against it? What happens when you push back against it? How far do you try to push back against it? Those were questions that kind of emerged in the telling that were really fun.
Yeah, yeah, completely. I want to talk a little bit about Guinevere too, and her and Lancelot's relationship with her in your story. And I loved her as a character in this. And so like, how did you make the decisions about what their story was going to be in your version of the tale, of the legend?
I loved writing Guinevere so much. So she, in the original, Lancelot and Guinevere famously have an affair, and that
Hmm.
sort of leads to the downfall of Camelot in a way. And so I knew that like Guinevere had to play a crucial role in this story, and I knew that Lancelot and Guinevere would connect, but I I wanted to kind of I wanted to play around with it. So we see their connection as like very deep and immediate, and they're drawn to each other, but it's not a sexual relationship.
Hmm.
It's a profound friendship. And what I still wanted to sort of play with like, but what does that look like to everyone in the court, right? What
Yeah.
are they talking about? What are they presuming about their relationship? So there's not quite the same love triangle in this, but that connection is still really there. When I was writing Guinevere too, I was like very much picturing Princess Diana. I
Oh,
like she was sort of visually what I was picturing, but also this idea that like she's sort of thrown into this, very public position, and kind of has the weight and expectations of an entire kingdom on her shoulders. What does that do to a person? Um,
hmm.
and I sort of imagine that it would be kind of a very lonely perch, and you sort of see that come through in her character.
Like Princess Diana, who was kind of like
Right.
very lonely. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, so I have to ask this question. Um, with this huge success of Heated Rivalry, do you have any thoughts on who would play Lancelot or anyone else in the movie or TV series version of this?
Oh my gosh, everyone keeps asking me this, and I'm like, so Galehaut is a redhead, so that narrows it down. So like
Right.
he's also, is it Tom Holland? Is
Oh,
it Kit O'Connor?
hmm. Oh, that's a
But
good
then
one.
yeah, but then who plays Lancelot? I honestly don't know. Lancelot has, he has like blonde tousled hair. I don't know. Like you would think maybe Ryan Reynolds or Ryan Gosling, but he's too old, I think, to play
Right,
Lancelot
right.
now. I don't know. Who did you have any? Were you picturing anyone?
I was thinking, like, I don't know if I'm hip enough to know the young actors like that
Yeah,
would
it's like
fit, you
because they're
know?
they would probably, you would want someone who could at least play down to their early 20s, even if they were a
Yes.
little older.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know. Yeah, I need to come up with a good response to that
Right, right.
question because
And
everyone keeps asking me, but it would be so cool to imagine it as to see it as like a movie or TV show.
total. Oh, I do like Sophie Sink for Guinevere. I think she would be a good one.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
she would be
She
great.
has the look.
Definitely.
Yeah, she has the
Yes.
presence. I think she would be good.
I do. So Galehaut's mom is a giantess named
Right.
Pagoda, and she, in my mind, is very much like Brienne of Tarth from Game of Thrones. I don't know if you watched that show.
Oh no, I'd have to look back. Yeah.
I can't remember. Gwendolyn Christie is the actress's name. She's in Severance too, but she is like very much like she would
A
have to
badass.
play. She would have to play Galehaut's mom. Yeah.
Have you had any movie interest, or can you not talk about it? Or
Some nibbles. I
yeah,
think like
yeah.
the challenge of it is that, it's a period piece and it's, sort
Mhm.
of sweeping.
Yeah.
So to bring it to that, like in that medium, it would require like someone with a really big vision.
hmm Yeah, I mean, that's what I think that same with historical. It's just, it's more expensive and it requires more. Yeah. Um, so I have a bunch of writing related questions. You said in your author's notes, which I recommend everyone read because I'm such a nerd about that stuff. I loved all your sources and notes. Writing this novel was a tremendous joy, in part because I didn't think anyone would ever read it. So this is your first novel. What was your process like?
Oh man, my process was like chaotic. I mean that when I say like the only way I could have written this was to convince myself that this wasn't going anywhere beyond just like I want to finish this for myself,
hmm
and no one ever has to read it. I don't have to share it with the soul, but I want to be able to get to the end, and I want to write this book. So once I tapped into that mindset, then I was really able to kind of, it liberated me from any sort of expectations of the book being good, of, the insecurities that I had around my my orientation to the material, the fact that that I wasn't coming at it from the perspective of an academic.
hmm
So, it helped me kind of conquer that self-doubt in a way because it shifted the focus to like, oh yeah, writing's just fun,
hmm
right? Like I'm doing this for the love of it and it's hard work. I'm challenging myself, but it's fulfilling, right? It's fulfilling work. And so that was sort of that was like the mindset. Yeah, that was the mindset that I really needed to do it.
And then in terms of process, I always ask this question, did you plot things out? Did you kind of just, write by the seat of your pants, as they say, or are you a plotter and planner?
I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. Like I like to know the loose beats of a story. Like I don't really plot. I make a list, right? Of
hmm
like this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And I find that like as I get further into the book, the list gets more and more it gets longer and
hmm
not necessarily that the book gets longer, but the list gets more granular and more detailed. So it's like this conversation happens and then this scene happens and then they move to this moment. And so I'm like I don't know if it's not really a true outline. Um but it's also not like it gives me some room to kind of get in there and like see what my characters are up to, what they're thinking. Like it gives me room to be spontaneous and to kind of explore, but I have like some sense of a roadmap, basically.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would think like with historical fiction, like this is so much research that you have to have some sort of like at least beats you want to hit along the way to keep organized, right? Like in terms of I mean, there's so much to this story in terms of the history
Yeah.
research. So, yeah.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And then, I had like separate Word docs going of like, here's all of the historical details about like what was going on in the in the mainland. Here's what was going on in Britain. Like here's what was happening in Ireland, even because we have some scenes that like I had all of these different Word docs going of like details about food, details about
Hmm.
society at this time. Like it was so
Yeah.
much, and still and yet, like I missed so many things. I had an expert read it. I did have a medievalist give it a read once I was done to kind of catch anything that was like glaring. And she caught like so many things that would have been so embarrassing if they had made it into the final book.
Oh,
So,
I feel that so much. I've done the same. Like I have found a freelancer for the last couple books because I just didn't want to like be mortified by something,
yeah,
Yeah,
it was amazing. Yeah, shout out to Becky Lartiga at Springfield College. She was so great.
awesome. So you come from a editorial background. How does that influence your writing?
Good question. Yeah, so I've been in publishing on the other side of the fence now since 2012. And yeah, for my day job, I'm a book editor. I do a mix of fiction and nonfiction, and I think it definitely plays a role in my writing in terms of like from a craft standpoint. I think that I'm a much better reviser and an editor of my own work than I am when I'm creating a rough draft. I think
Hmm.
that I can create like a pretty bad rough draft, but I can bring it up, you know, a few levels in the revision process.
Yeah.
But I think more than anything, being on the other side of the fence, I also, my expectations, I think, are more right sized just because I know kind of how hard it is to make a book work today. Not to
Hmm.
be depressing, but like it's really, really challenging. And what that did for me is that it kind of allows me just to celebrate every little win,
Hmm.
because they do matter,
They do.
so any good review, like any nice mention, any
Hmm.
positive reader feedback, it's all great, right?
Yep.
And just the fact that it gets to be a book is so cool.
Mhm.
So yeah.
No, I'm so glad you said that. I talked to my author friends. I was at a festival a couple weeks ago, and it's true. You have to celebrate the little milestones along the way because this industry's hard. And writing a book is hard. Publishing is hard.
It
So
sure is.
yeah, you just gotta like celebrate each little, like you said, each little win for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a couple more questions. This is a two-part one. We have a lot of writers that listen to this podcast. And you're a writer and an editorial director. What is the best advice you can give them about writing and about getting published?
So I would say those are like think of those as two different things, maybe would be like a place that I would start. Um, I think write the thing you love, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and and write for the joy of writing.
Hmm.
That it's so wild how like I've worked with so many authors, so many novelists over the years. You can tell when an author is having fun,
Oh
when
yeah.
that was a fun book to write, or like they really just like they brought all everything they had, like a lot of passion to the project. It
Hmm.
totally shines through in the telling. So not only does it benefit you editorially to kind of write from that place of exuberance, but I think like the only way to stay sane and do this, because like especially if you're like me, where like writing is something you do on the side, right? Like if
Yeah.
you have that 9 to 5 and you're writing, like like you want it to be joyful,
Yes.
you want it to be, that's not to say that it's easy, or that it's, it can be painful too.
Yeah.
But it also, you want it to be fun.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
And then from in terms of publishing, um, you know, it's all about having a thick skin. Everyone always says this, but all it takes is one agent and
Mm-hmm.
one editor to fall in love with your book, you know?
Yep.
And no's really are just tickets to the game. Everyone hears them.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that like anyone who can publish a book, like it's worth celebrating, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Good advice. Are you ready to share what you're working on now or next, or you're just enjoying the ride? I know this just came out a month ago, so
I am very much enjoying the ride.
good for
Yeah. I
you.
mean, I have a couple ideas that I'm sort of vacillating between and I'm kind of like taking them for like a road test each in my mind right
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
But I haven't really sat down to put pen to paper yet. So we'll see. We'll
Yeah. Yeah.
see. It
Awesome.
kind of depends on which one calls to me
Like
more. Yeah.
percolates. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how can readers best stay in touch with you?
I'm on Instagram at Glynn ER85, my last name Glynn, and Glynner85 is
Okay.
my Instagram name. That's probably the easiest way. I'm also on TikTok at John Glynn Books, but I'm more frequently on Instagram.
Got it. Same. Um, so that is a wrap, John. It was lovely to meet you. Thank you again for being a guest, and congratulations on your debut. Again, the novel is A Lost Book of Lancelot, and it's available now wherever books are sold. My latest novel is The Women at Arlington Hall. Please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel or follow me wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks again, John, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you. This
Thank
was so
you.
much fun.